Okay, so I now have all of the downstairs insulated, at least as much as I'm going to do for this stage. So this is the part that's going to kind of be the grand experiment. This is sort of inexpensive vinyl peel and stick wallpaper. As I was trying to think of how I was going to finish out the walls once I got the insulation, and I know a lot of people do plywood. They cut plywood to fit and then finish it. I've seen people do other kinds of panels that are covered with fabric, more sort of Van Build style. And I was kind of going around and around and thinking about how long it would take to build all of those and how precise I would have to be with all the cutting of all those panels and the expense of those materials, and figuring out how to adequately support that weight up on the walls. And I had this idea because I actually used this stuff on a problematic wall in the house. I was actually really pleased with how it turned out. It was very forgiving of the various imperfections. And even though I don't normally work really well with like floppy, sheety fabric kind of stuff, I found this pretty easy to work with and pretty forgiving. And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try and see if I can just apply this directly to the insulation to give this a finished look. That way I'm not adding any significant weight. The walls don't have to hold up any significant weight. I chose sort of a light color to lighten it up in here, and this vinyl is, you know, it's got a sort of washable sort of finish on it, so you know it's something that I could clean easily as opposed to like a fabric or a carpet or something like that. So we're gonna see if this works. If it doesn't, I can always go back and cover these panels up with something else, but I hope this is gonna work. And the paint color I selected for the furniture was actually based on this wallpaper. I got the wallpaper and found the best match paint swatch to the color that's sort of in there. So hopefully that's gonna sort of bring it all together. This peel and stick wallpaper can get kind of expensive depending on where you get it. The stuff that I used in the house, I found on Amazon for less than $7 a roll. You can easily find this stuff up to 30, 40, 50 bucks a roll. So this is definitely the budget option. I calculated it would take 6 rolls of this to do the inside of the truck, including the entire ceiling panel once I get insulation up there. Hanging the wallpaper went just fine. I have a little experience working with this material, and while the various nooks, crannies, and angles posed some challenges, ultimately I was pretty pleased with how this went. I'm not too worried about how this edge is going to look because I think I'm going to make trim to cover this edge. I'll show you that trim in just a moment. At least that bit wasn't a fail. Okay, that took a little bit of time, but I am really happy with how clean that looks. I think once I trim out that window opening and maybe run some trim along the top and the bottom just to clean up those edges, but overall, man, that looks so much better. Now let's do this one. So in order to clean up some of these edges that are just like not quite perfect because that I can't get the paper to sort of wrap around and stick on that, I use more of this 1/2-inch aluminum angle that I have a bunch of, like I used on this. I painted it black, and that piece is going to go right there to finish that edge off. And then for these window edges, which you could see the way it was just impossible to cut that paper perfectly to match that, at least it was impossible for me. I've used some 1-inch aluminum here, cut to fit, and I had to do a little bit of fiddly work with angles and stuff to get this to come together nicely. That's there, and then this one up there. So I just need to clean up this metal and get it attached.
The $80 Harbor Freight drill press has proven itself useful over and over on so many projects. It's really a game changer when you need to be precise, especially drilling metal. I'm using some sheet metal screws right into the insulation to secure this trim. It's not particularly strong, but it's good enough to hold this thin, lightweight aluminum in place, and there aren't really any forces pushing on this trim. I did use some construction adhesive to secure the much smaller black trim at the bottom, since there wasn't really room for screws.
I am pretty happy with how all this came out. So when I decided to put wallpaper directly onto the insulation, I knew it was either a stroke of genius or really, really stupid. It was worth a try though, because this stuff is relatively inexpensive. I knew that if it didn't work out, I could still just go ahead and cover it, you know, more traditionally the way most people do, with maybe some kind of plywood or something else. But I love the idea of how lightweight and easy this would be to get this covered and not have to figure out, you know, how am I actually going to hold plywood up on these walls. It looked really good when it went on, and I was really happy with the results. Some weeks have gone by, and I don't know if it's the insulation that's off-gassing, but it is bubbling up in many places. Before I even went down this road, I used a scrap of this same kind of wallpaper on a scrap of the insulation that I had used in the Lear topper. Now, I had used the foil-backed polyiso insulation in the Lear topper. This is a test piece of that self-adhesive wallpaper that I put on foil-backed polyiso months ago, literally months ago. It hasn't bubbled in the least, and that made me think that, you know, this was going to be a legitimate approach. I went with the pink stuff because it has a much sort of smoother, harder surface. The foil-backed polyiso gets dented really easily, and I thought I could get a nicer, smoother finish on the pink. And it did. It came out really, really nicely on the pink. But I'm wondering if the pink is off-gassing something, and if I had gone with the foil-backed polyiso, there would not have been this bubbling up. And I don't know that it's off-gassing. I don't know if maybe it's it could be the paper itself that's off-gassing something that is creating these bubbles in here. I don't know. I didn't have anything like this happen when I used this stuff in the house. That was over a painted wall, which is what it's really designed to do. You know, it's for inside of a house. On the other side of the camper that's going to get covered up by a cabinet, I used scraps of the polyiso that I had left over from the Lear topper to insulate that area, because it wasn't going to get seen anyway. But what I've done now is I've applied some of this to the foil-backed polyiso to see how it fares, and if it does any better than how this turned out. I'm not going to undo all the work I did on this insulation. If I can't make this work, I will cover it with something else. I'm really just testing the wallpaper on the polyiso to see if it is still a legitimate approach if you used a different kind of insulation than what I've used. Meanwhile, what I'm doing is carefully puncturing these bubbles and trying to work the air out of them, because that bubbling has actually stretched the vinyl a little bit. There's now more material than is needed for there, so that creates like creases. I don't have time between now and going to Expo Mountain West to redo these walls or recover these walls with anything else, so it's going to have to fly for now. And we'll see how it does over the next couple of months, and if I need to cover it with something else, I'll cover it with something else. I knew that was a possibility from the get-go. So it's now been a couple of more weeks. The bubbling on the wallpaper continues to be unacceptably bad looking despite my efforts to release air and flatten them out. The cabinetry on this side has since been built and installed, and this test piece of wallpaper on the foil-backed insulation continues to remain smooth and without bubbles. I wish I had just used that kind of insulation in the rest of the truck.
In upcoming episodes, we'll take detailed looks at building the electrical system, the tall storage cabinet on the driver's side, and more bad ideas as I develop my kitchen setup. Also, finally, a new adventure series in the mountains of Colorado. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode, and thank you for watching.